Thanks, Aidan. I think being a co-chair and then doing the keynote is a bit like that guy who always insists on singing at his own wedding or something, you know. So, but what I thought, so it was my job to get the keynotes in. So I think I've done a fantastic job of getting really good keynotes in. But I didn't want to use up a last session. I thought some of you'd be going home. So even if I'm really crap, I figure, as Meatloaf almost said, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. So you've done okay. I just want to say the open education community is my favourite group of people. I think you're fantastic, and it's been an honour to chair this conference. But I won't go on about that because I'm an emotional guy. I cried at watching Paddington, so I'll get on with the keynote. So the battle for open. So I've written this book, which is freely available under a CC license, CC BY. It's published by a great called Ubiquity Press, so you can get it PDF, ebook, or you can read it online. I mean, you can go out and buy the physical copy. You know that yacht's not going to buy itself, so feel free to do that. But so I'm going to try and address some of the themes. So the central theme is that the Chuckle Brothers are just brilliant. No, the central theme is that openness has been victorious in many ways. So I think particularly if you look at some things like open access mandates, success of Moocs, it kind of feels like for those of us who have been around open education for a long time, the past couple of years have seen a kind of real breakthrough from stop just being kind of a niche interest, almost on the verge of the mainstream. I think that almost is an interesting point. But it's almost like now that initial victory's been won, now the real direction is to be decided. And I'm indebted to Simon Horrocks, who pointed to me the idea of this French tradition of history called the longue durée. They say, don't look at all those kind of big events that you think make up history. It's actually about longer cycles that are really important. Things kind of persist almost beyond what you think. So although the French was really important, it took many, many years after that for a lot of those kind of things to kind of work through. I think that's kind of where we are in openness at the moment. So try and keep this idea of not just the initial victories, but it's kind of longer duration in mind. So in this talk, I first want to sort of look at the thing of why I call it a battle. It's a shame Sheila's not here, so I can defend my choice of it being a battle. Then I want to talk about some of the roots of open education. I think that's quite interesting, actually. Where you've come from in open education influences what you think it should be about. Then I want to talk about 3 of those battle fronts and explore them in more detail and some conclusions. So why I call it a battle? By the way, I'm a big ice hockey fan, so my daughter serves my daughter, so she makes me put in an ice hockey picture in every presentation, so there it is. So I think there's 3 reasons why I think it's a battle. The first is that there are kind of real things to be fought over. So this is Cable in a previous life, kind of leading the troops, sign the license. But there are kind of real, what people believe about and what's important is being fought over. But like battles and wars, actually it's often about money. It's almost impossible to say how much the global education market is worth, but someone in the US said, Department of Education said it's worth $6 trillion kind of globally. Elsevier, the science publisher, has a $2 billion revenue for science publishing. So there's kind of real money to be fought over here. And when there's real, it gets people's interest. And lastly, that kind of saying the victor gets to write history. So I think there's a really interesting battle around narrative and who tells the stories about open education, which we'll come on to. So first of all, just to go back to those kind of roots of open education, I think there are kind of 3 interesting strands that come together. The first is, I'm from the Open University. So Open University, some people will say this was the kind of true start of open education. It's always interesting when you look at kind of historical trends. You can actually go back much further than this. And there's a really good paper that marks the use of coffee houses, for instance, as kind of vehicles for open education. But in kind of modern history, open universities often give us the kind of start of this. For open universities, what was really important was the idea of anyone could come and study with you, an open entry. You didn't need qualifications to come and study with you. So they kind of developed all these methods which are based on distance education, part-time study anytime, anywhere. So it wasn't really about things being free so much, and they kind of assumed that the government these things, there would be ways of financing it. So that was kind of one model. Another kind of starting point people often give is the idea of free or open source software, and there's a kind of subtle distinction between these. So free here is as in freedom and rights. So free software, there's rights. When you have a piece of software, you have the right to change that software and then redistribute it. Open source software kind of took the same principle, but really there emphasis was on efficiency. So that the saying is, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So they were just saying, simply by making your code open, that's a really efficient way to work. And there's a really nice link here to open education. So if you look there's a talk by David Wiley about rights, and when he was first thinking about publishing a book openly, he looked at the work they'd done on licenses for free software and adapted that for his early licenses, and then that was what formed the kind of basis for Creative Commons. There's a kind of a direct link there through David. And lastly, it's a bit of an embarrassing term now, and we all pretend we didn't use it, but Web 2.0 was quite important, I think, to just kind of get this whole idea of sharing out there. So people got used to kind of sharing stuff very quickly, very easily. You didn't need memorandums of understanding. You could just kind of share stuff and anyone could do it. So what we end up is this kind of set of coalescing principles for open education. And depending where you've come from, different things will be important to you. So for some people, it's all about free, not paying money. For other people, it's about rights that are really important. For other people, it's about opening up education. So although those things kind of overlap, they're not always the same. So that's sometimes I think that's why when we talk about open education, you can have a conversation with someone else, and actually you're talking about two different things. So I think there's some common themes that come through here, so some kind of recurring themes. It starts out often that kind of from a belief that openness is a public good. It's a good thing to do, and you kind of get some real advocates and evangelists about it to kind of drive it forward. Now, initially, that's kind of resisted. People say it's unworkable, it's low quality. So when the Open University started, for instance, they said, business education, that's kind of got a really bad reputation. You can't do a proper way. And all the kind of traditional universities try to resist it and say it couldn't be done. So a little side story. So we used to have summer schools at the Open University. And initially, no universities would let us come onto their campus. So at one point, they were seriously considering hiring a cruise liner and just kind of sort of sailing around the UK for the summer school. But luckily, we did manage to kind of get campuses. Then it tends to become mainstream. So to carry on with the Open University example, so the Open University was set up, and then that model was adopted in lots of other countries around the world. And finally, it becomes kind of adopted and adapted. So to carry on with the Open University example, other universities, kind of traditional universities, then started doing versions of continuous education, blended learning, all those kind of things. But I think it's important to realise that that's not an inevitable cycle. So at any from the resisted point, I think it can fizzle off and die. It can become just a niche interest. It can become a big commercial interest, but it doesn't need to follow that pattern. But that's kind of where we've got to with those three themes in open education. So today I was going to talk about three battles. The first is this kind of battle. And so what does openness mean? So open as in, Udacity, the Mooc company, had a contract with Georgia Tech, where Georgia Tech were giving them their content, but then Georgia Tech couldn't use its own content, even in other courses at Georgia Tech, but Udacity could use it elsewhere if they wanted to. And that doesn't feel very open. And famously, Sebastian Thrun, the founder of Udacity, said, there will be only 10 global providers for education in the future, and we want to be one of them. And again, very open. They didn't feel like where I was coming from about open education. I just compare that with the Hewlett definition of OER, which I think Cable put up earlier. So it kind of really emphasises the point of a license that allows free use and repurposing. So here there's kind of very strong principles and beliefs about what openness means. I just want to kind of take an example here that relates to OER. So, as you know, I lead the OER Research Hub, and a lot of the team are here. And so looking at our work, we've kind of thought of three different types of users of OER. So the first are what we might call OER active, and that's us, basically. So people who know what OERs are interested in them, kind of prepared to be advocates, those kind of things. And I think what we've done so far is we've tried to concentrate on growing that group and over the past 13 years. So we've kind of got this global community and stuff. But I think if we're talking about mainstreaming, then there are other groups you kind of need to reach now. And so I've classified these as OERs facilitator. So they're people for whom OERs allow them to do something else, and it's that something else, the thing that they're really interested in. So we work in network, for instance. And for them, what they're really interested in is flipping their classroom. And so to do that, they want to have good quality resources they can give the kids to learn at home. So OERs allow them to do that. Then there's OER consumers. These people don't really care about licenses. It's nice if it's there, but they want stuff to be free and good quality. So we found, for instance, that a lot of students, before they come in to study at university, are trying stuff out through OERs to make sure that they're kind of ready to study. Or once they're in university, they're using OERs to supplement what they're learning. I think for us, for the OER active people, we could probably carry on. But if stuff stops being open, there's a big group of people, which is kind of much bigger than our community, who won't know the opportunity that they've already lost, but they didn't even know they needed stuff to be open. So that flipped learning network wouldn't get to have those lovely OERs if stuff was just kind of packaged and sold to them. So the second area is the battle for money. So I'm going to talk about open access here. So this article plots the growth of open access journals and articles, and you might be able to spot a trend there. So it's kind of all going one way. We've established the gold and the green routes to open access. So I think there are debates to be had about these, about which is the best way to do it, whether they're fair and all that kind of stuff. But we have put in place a kind of framework that allows you to reach open access for lots of people. There are now major policies for open access in most countries that kind of mandate that any research that comes out of publicly funded research projects needs to be made open access. So this is kind of a really good example of that victory of openness. It's kind of broken through, as Cable was saying at lunchtime. There's no academic writer at the moment who can really be unaware of open access, and that's a major victory. There was a Wiley survey published recently, and for the first time ever, more than 50% of their authors had published in open access. It's kind of, we've kind of reached that tipping point, I think. So, you know, I'm going back to that common threads thing. You know, they've been resisting it. You know, open access publishing isn't as good quality as the traditional publishing. You can't go with that stuff. Anyone can publish it. It's not sustainable. All those kind of things. They've reached a point where they've gone, oh crap, we can't fight this anymore. What else? And you have to admire them. It's just kind of genius in a way. So there's what's called the hybrid route swindle. So you end up paying for some articles to be published as open access within the journal, and at the same time libraries are still paying, so you're paying twice, which is called double dipping. And that's been going on long enough now to start to kind of look at some of the effects of that. So the Wellcome Trust, kind of just one research body, estimated across 2012 to 13, academics spent 3.88 million to publish articles in open access journals. They were paying the gold route to have those articles published open access, of which 3.17 million was then paying again for the universities to have access to those journals. So hey, we get paid twice. Who wouldn't want that? So and someone's done a 5-year mean study. These people, they reckon, just for straightforward open access journals, the average cost per article is 1,164, and for hybrid journals, 1,849. So this is a really good example of that. You know, if we don't control the direction, other people come in and take over what openness means. And also we've got this idea of what we call predatory open access practice. So suddenly, if you're paying for an article to be published, that changes the nature of that relationship between author and journal. So all these journals have sprung up from all over the place. I'm sure email saying, come and publish in our journal on, you know, fill in the subject here. And you go to that publisher, you never heard of them before, and they've got something like 4,000 journal articles, you know, and basically it's just a pay-to-publish model. And looking beyond open access, education is kind of seen as the next big target for technology venture capital. So last year it was up 55% to 1.87 billion, the sort of money coming in. So they've kind of looked around, we've done health, we've done these kind of things. Education, there's a lot of money in education, let's go there. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, it does mean that people are now eyeing you up with different things. So I wouldn't be a keynote of this conference if I didn't mention open washing. Josie, you didn't know open washing in your talk. You know, you get a special badge. So I'm the third one to mention open washing. I think it probably tells you something, but it's time. So open washing is the idea, as we've heard, you know, that you kind of use the idea of openness to try and sell a product. So Udacity and Google and a bunch of others, for instance, formed this Open Education Alliance. And if you read what they say it is, it's an industry-wide alliance of employers and educators in the service of students throughout the world. It provides access to cutting-edge and relevant post-secondary education that empowers individuals to pursue successful careers in technology. There's nothing in there about it being free, open access, you can reuse any of that material. So it's kind of got openness in the title, but it's not followed through in any of the kind of definition about what it's about. So there's a kind of sense, have any of you ever been to a safari park in your car, and these little cute monkeys jump on your car and you think, oh, they're nice and friendly. And look at their smiling, they're jumping up and down, they might be showing you their bottom, that kind of stuff. And then they jump on the roof and they start pulling off your windscreen wipers and stripping off the air, all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what it's felt a bit like with openness. I mean, all these new people came in and these new companies, and it was great. And then they started sort of stripping it apart. Which leads us on to the third idea, which is the battle for narrative. Is David in the audience? Thank you, David, for the image, the much used image. And so I think this is another area to look at. And Moocs are kind of a really good example for this. So this is using Google Trends. By the way, a little tip for you, if ever you need a slide, just do a Google Trend picture, that works fine. So blue line is OERs, kind of just ticking along nicely, increasing in awareness, and then suddenly, 2000, from nowhere, Moocs, bam, it's got a big explosion, and they're all over the place. The next slide is just a reminder just that we're not very important. So if ever you also do is do a comparison against Kim Kardashian, because that shows you what the internet really cares about, which is nothing to do with what we're cared about. So we're not actually that important. So the big Mooc explosions, it's major Mooc providers just springing up on a weekly basis. Like, here's a new Mooc provider, hey. And millions of enrolled, pick a number, 50 million, 70 million, 100, I don't know. So there are millions of people enrolled in courses, which is a good thing. I think it's very easy to say that those numbers don't mean anything because most of them drop out and stuff. But, if we've got millions of people looking at OERs, that's great. A million people sign up for courses, at least they're kind of thinking about learning. So I think it's all good stuff. We had major media coverage, and we went from, I couldn't get my dogs to listen to me about OER. You're getting Newsnight on the phone to you, and the Vice Chancellor, tell me about Moocs, somebody get me a Mooc. So, it was kind of really exciting. So George has this quite funny quote, and he says, if education was like grunge rock, the Moocs were like Nirvana, the kind of breakthrough act that suddenly everyone wants to have a piece of. What this led to was kind of really interesting narrative that you saw emerging through all this kind of coverage, called the Silicon Valley narrative. And it starts off in this idea that education is broken. This is stated as absolute fact, kind of incontrovertible fact. It's not even worth arguing about. Obviously, education is broken. So there's a report out last year from Pearson's, what's called the Avalanche Report, and they're saying the models of higher education that march triumphantly across the globe in the second half of the 20th century are broken. Clay Shirky said that the education space is massive, very broken. There's a company called Degree.com who had a campaign said is broken, someone should do something, someone being them. And Sebastian, I might get this on a t-shirt. Education is broken. Face it, it's so broken at so many ends, it requires a little bit of Silicon Valley magic. So only Silicon Valley can come in and save you. And there's also an obsession with this idea of disruption. So disruption comes from Clayton Christensen's work, where he looks at the way digital technologies disrupt traditional industries. And actually, it wasn't a bad idea. He looked at things like, so the way digital cameras disrupted the analog camera was kind of really quite profound. But it's one of those things like, here's a good idea, let's apply it to everything. And within Silicon Valley, in technology in general, there are disruption. Because the idea about disruption is that it means you sweep away and you gain a whole new market. And it relies on newcomers into the market. So you're immediately saying the people within that sector don't have any value and can't change it. So you often see quotes like, so Christensen himself says, disruption is a necessary and overdue chapter in our public schools. That Avalanche report I mentioned, again, justifies itself by saying elements of the traditional university are threatened by the coming avalanche. Universities are ripe for disruption. Of course, Maya was looking at OERs, and he kind of dismissed them because they hadn't disrupted practice. And if you haven't, the only measure of success is disruption in this world. So here you have a kind of irresistible storm in many ways for the media to cover. So you've got education is broken, so that means we've got to do a complete change. It's ripe for disruption, we know that, and it's a technological solution, and Moocs are often seen as a technological solution. And key to that is outsiders with new ideas. It's not just us within the industry or sector kind of coming up with ideas. It's these people on a white horse, riding in, a technology white horse riding in to kind of save us from ourselves. So that's kind of really interesting because that happened, and then lo and behold, sort of 2 years after the year of the Mooc, 3 years after the Mooc, they went, oh, we haven't completely changed the entire world. Why is that? Why are there 10 providers of global education? Who knew? So there's this book out called The End of College, and now they're inventing a new narrative about why Moocs failed. Now, I don't think Moocs did fail. I think Moocs are really interesting. They do great stuff. Because the failure of Moocs to, keyword, disrupt higher education has nothing to do with the quality of the courses themselves, many of which are quite good and get better. Colleges are holding technology at bay because the only thing Moocs provide is access to world-class professors at an unbeatable price. So it's our fault that Moocs failed because we're kind of evil colleges. So I think there's so much stuff in there. It's like, Moocs failed because they didn't disrupt. So regardless of whether people found them useful, they kind of helped people change, that doesn't matter. Disrupt, totally. But also, they didn't fail because of anything to do with the product or the way that learners need to support, all the stuff that we kind of know. They failed because universities were fighting it. And I kind of get the sense that, it's that saying, if you don't tell your story, then someone will tell it for you. And so you get articles like this. After a setback, online courses are rethought. And so the whole way that, any of us have been involved in education technology, been teaching online courses for some time, but now MOOCs and online courses are synonymous. That that's the only thing that exists for an online course is that it's a MOOC. So all the other work you've been doing about supported online courses, so you will have seen all the different acronyms for MOOCs that suddenly appeared. So small private online courses, which are just online courses, I think. So, but suddenly, if you get some kind of variation on the MOOC acronym, you can do it. So I'm guilty of this. I dusted off all my old research proposals that had been rejected and just did search and replace MOOCs, and there we are. You just submit them again. But there is a kind of sense that that someone else is taking over the story and it's getting away from you. And I think what happens, it creates this kind of false dichotomies. You're either a good unicorn or an evil unicorn. Those are the kind of two choices you've got. So you're kind of pro-MOOC or anti-MOOC. You're open or closed. And I think as the point that Sheila made really well in her keynote was actually it's a lot more subtle about that. And if you force people into these two camps, it doesn't help either camp, I don't think. So last time I'll talk about some lessons from the VLE or LMS. I think I kind of have some in the open world. So I was the VLE director briefly at the Open University. And I think VLEs are actually really good things. So when they came along in sort of the early 2000s, they really helped. If you think e-learning, kind of getting e-learning promoted was a good thing, they kind of really helped in that goal. Because you suddenly had different systems. Suddenly you could have a universal system across the university. You could get staff training for those people. They were really easy to use. So suddenly you could upskill a lot of people, and they could all start doing e-learning. You didn't have to go off and learn all that kind of stuff. But they came at a price, really. So first of all, we kind of outsourced all the expertise to companies like Blackboard. Secondly, this kind of process of sedimentation that built up around the VLE. So we started putting in place process and admin that's to deal with Blackboard or Moodle or whatever it is. So instead of thinking of e-learning, you would just think about what's our process for Blackboard for this, and you'd employ smart ed tech people and they would become your Blackboard officer, and then you'd have a policy about everything going up rather than how can we do this? What's the best way to do this in e-learning? So Brian, who's in the audience, has written a really good paper with Jim Groom, sort of laying out some charges against the VLE, or LMS, as you would call it. They kind of have 5 main charges. First of all, kind of systems, it privileged this kind of technology management mindset. You kind of had to manage the technology. It created silos. You kind of operated separately from everywhere else. You weren't kind of going out in the open. Learners use the system wasn't really like anything else to then go on to learn. You'd leave university and you wouldn't have meet a VLE elsewhere. Cost is a really important one, so it kind of drains the financial and also the human resources. You've only got so much money, and that all goes into the VLEs. If you go along and say, hey, I'd like to explore a WordPress install, it's like, it does not compute, it's not a Blackboard function, you can't have it. And they also talk about the idea of confidence. So you can get in these kind of really exciting ed tech people and then just kind of grind them down as they became the kind of Blackboard. So I think there's a kind of interesting history lesson there of the very recent past about how something got us so far, but then it became a barrier to further progress. I think we're kind of coming out of that now. There's kind of been a phase where people have got used to VLEs, and now they think, actually, I wouldn't mind moving beyond that. I think the same happens with openness. We might get so far very quickly, but then we need to kind of move on from there. So, to conclude, openness is not just a peripheral interest now, it's kind of moving away from that peripheral interest. And I think the fact that this conference is about mainstream, we've been hearing lots of really good stuff about people really moving that out, about policy, driving this kind of stuff. But really it's about a battle of ownership. Who decides the direction for openness? So I want you to kind of just think about two things really to go away from this conference. First of all, why does openness really matter? Is it just that it helps you solve a particular problem? Is it an altruistic thing? Is it, inevitable? But why do you think it matters? And secondly, what can it do for you? What would be valuable in your everyday life that it will help you do? So I just want to go back to those common themes. So we had the belief in openness as public good. That's where we started off with open education. It's kind of been resisted, and open access is unworkable, low quality. And we're kind of coming out there now. So I think we're there now, just before it goes into mainstream. And that isn't inevitable that it goes into the mainstream. So although I've kind of said it's one, that's not necessarily the case. It could go elsewhere. So we kind of get to decide what I think. So you are part of that battle, I think. I think it's very easy when you're working away in your project to think, oh, nobody's listening, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm struggling, nobody's downloading my OERs, this isn't working. But I want you to kind of really understand the work you do is actually really important and valuable. And I think the thing that happens in education, change is very, very slow, and then it's very, very quick. It must be very, very quick. So this is my table thumping moment. So a quote from Robert Kennedy says, "Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small proportion. It's from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped." And that's where we are now. Thank you.
As before, we will take questions. I know some of our online audience wanted to ask questions, so if anybody does, if they want to send a tweet to @MarenDeepwell, then shout them out for us, because we haven't got any technology to do that, unlike at the old conference when we do. So let's take one from the audience first, and then we'll see if anybody comes in online afterwards. Please. Yes, Andy, go on. There's a mic coming towards you.
Martin, going back to the issue of using the metaphor of battle, actually using that metaphor of battle implies there are two sides, which reinforces some of the things you're saying and you're trying to avoid and say we shouldn't be trying to have those dualities. Wouldn't it be better to use a metaphor of struggle? That we're all struggling to do things, and other people on the other side are struggling to do things, and there might be different things and green things, but it means there could be many other different competitors. So it's taking the idea of struggle in terms of perhaps an ecological concept, in terms of the struggles for survival, fitness, survival of species, and the like.
I think that's true, and in the book I try using the idea of resilience to kind of think about openness as well. I think you're right that there is a kind of sense of victory and us versus them in battle. The reason I start with it, it's a slightly cool title, so you always have to go with that. Always let slightly cool titles win. But also I think that those three elements that are kind of characteristic of a battle, I think are worth exploring. But you're right, with any metaphor you use, you gain some stuff and you lose some stuff. So I think I'm not saying it's the only metaphor. I thought Sheila's gardening metaphor was very good as well. So I think you get some stuff. And I totally get what Sheila's saying. It's a hard thing to come into everyday work. I'm going to fight the battle. It's easy to come in. I want to come in and do some gardening. That's a nice thing to do. So I think both of those metaphors are kind of equally valid. But I think there's something about the idea of certainly this sense of we've kind of won a major victory, and that idea that actually often after those initial victories, that's when the real direction of things are decided. And we kind of see it so often in history. We've kind of seen it with a lot of the Arab Spring and things. You have these big revolutions. Yeah, they've won, but actually, as we're now seeing, as that kind of plays out, now's the time when actual direction of stuff is really decided.
Okay, anyone else? Dominic, down the front. Somebody's going to have to run quite a long way. Oh, sorry, Chrissy was there. We'll get the mic down to Dominic for the next question. Go on, Chrissy, please.
First time I saw you in the flesh presenting, and really, really enjoyed it. My question is, you left us with a question at the end, which I think helps us focus and refocus on why we are doing it. What would be your answer to why open matters? Thank you.
I was not supposed to have to answer my own question. I'm a Keynote. I think actually there are a couple of answers there. But one is actually it is just a very efficient way to work. So that idea of the open source movement, they just adopts it as a pragmatic approach. Actually, it wasn't really about kind of core beliefs. So, writing a book and releasing it under an open access license is actually just a much more efficient way to get your stuff out there. And, you're never going to be rich writing academic textbooks. You may as well just try and get it to such a wide reach as possible. So I think actually it's just a very efficient and pragmatic way to work. But, also there is a kind of a core belief. Why did I come into education? It's to help people, to share. As David Wiley says, education is about sharing. That's what it's about, fundamentally. And so it does feel that, that we've allowed a system to kind of become created that seems almost at odds with our kind of core beliefs and what we're here to do.
Okay. Dominic, please.
Just going to be a metaphor one, Dominic. So.
First, I wanted to echo your thing about the revolution. As I'm a child of the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia back then, and we used to had the saying that the best day after the revolution is the first one, and then you have the slow or rapid disillusionment after that. But I just going to go back to the slide that you had. We had the sort of phases or steps, and you said you started with the sort of openness as a public good. What it's for. But I'm thinking it sort of makes it seem as if once it becomes mainstream, the public good argument goes away. But education, openness is good because it makes good, open things that are the public good. So it's not the process; it's the result. Education wasn't always seen as a public good. It had to be made that way. But now it's mainstream. But it's still the public good, and people keep making that argument because they have to justify more spending, reform, and things like that. So I think perhaps it's important to say the public good is kind of more as an environment in which we have to exist in order for the mainstream to actually sustain itself over the long run.
So just to say, the reason why I said to Dominic, is it going to be a metaphor question? He runs a really good blog called Metaphor Hacker, so you should read that. I think that's a good point. So I should probably have that as a kind of a cycle in a way, because I wasn't implying that once it gets adopted and adapted, it's not, in many ways, that's how it achieves its public good. So if you're taking the Open University example, the fact that the OU exists, but then all other, because it was successful, all the other universities then started doing forms of open education is a really good result. It's a great thing.
Okay, Terry, please.
Hi, Terry McAndrew, Higher Education Academy. The metaphor of battle offers the opportunity to support the concept of battle honours. What should we be awarding medals for?
Terry and I were supposed to come up with awards for this conference. So what Terry wants me to say is, next year when we do OER conference, what would be good things for us to give awards out for papers? But I think if we were to give the kind of the open thing for the Victoria Cross, the open equivalent of Victoria Cross, I wouldn't want to kind of go down the kind of metrics to say it was not like the person who has the most hits or the most reuse. I think these kind of things about innovative use, and also I think just effective use for a particular community. I think that's where stuff's really interesting. So when stuff really makes a difference, and it could be to quite a small community, but actually really makes a difference, that's the stuff that I think is really valuable.
Okay, thank you. Simon, please.
Martin, this is a question that I don't like having. When somebody asks you to look to the future, but do you think perhaps we'll ever get to the point where we have to begin to argue for closed rather than argue for open? Yeah, no,
I absolutely. I think it's easy when you kind of forget when here, because it's a kind of subclause. All openness is good, and that's absolutely not the right thing. And I think I want to avoid the other side. Thing I want to avoid is this kind of open Stalinism, where we start trying to expose people for not being appropriately open or open enough, and kind of using it to batter people with. That's never a good approach. And there are absolutely times when you should be closed, and it's an appropriate thing to do. I think Sheila mentioned a lot of our learners, for instance, particularly at the Open University, people who come to the OU are often nervous, they're unsure about learning. So I wouldn't want to force them to kind of operate all in the open right from the start. It's good for them because you'd lose them. They would kind of, we were talking the other day, learning's a very vulnerable process. I think being able to do that in a closed, reassuring space is absolutely the right thing to do. So I think there are plenty of good arguments of being closed, but I think what I'd like to kind of see is, I think Cable often uses this phrase, kind of open by default. So assume you're open, stuff is open, and then work from there. It's like, well, actually, in this case, we're happy to be closed or closed a bit in these ways because of these reasons, but rather than the other way around, I just think it's the way it is at the moment. Okay, I'm going to draw an end to questions there because we've got two more things to do before the end of the conference. So I'd like again to thank Martin on behalf of you all for this. As ever at the end of a conference,
would mean we could be here for another conference because there have been so many people involved who made the conference so good. I do, however, today want to say a special thank you to one of our colleagues who's not able to be here because of her mother coming close to the end of her life, and who spent most of the last year working to make this conference happen. So Debbie, I know you probably are watching us live, at least you were about 20 minutes ago. So Debbie Baff, I know all of us, the great work you put into this. We are sorry you can't be here, and we wish you all the best in these difficult days, difficult few days. Thank you very much indeed. Debbie's done an exceptional job of keeping the links together, but the rest of the people who've been involved have been a huge group, 20 people on the conference committee, the team from ALT, the team from the conference services of the University of South Wales and the Royal Welsh College team, and all of you who've attended the conference. It's been a real sense of community. Somebody asked in one of the tweets, you know, did everybody know each other in advance? And in fact, for me, not so much, but I know most of you now, and that's one of the things that's been really great about this conference, that we have interacted, engaged, and related both in face-to-face. So for all of you who are involved in the work to lead this conference, I know for me and Martin, we'd meet once a month as co-chairs to catch up if there's anything else that needed to be done, and the looked after the social initiatives, and you know who you looked after the tweeting and the Facebook activity, the teams who looked after the networking, the wider networking activity, the two people who did all the work on the abstracts, making it easy for us to do the final selection of those of you who are here. It's astounding how much work there was, but how almost just asking for it to happen, and people went away and made it so. It was a real gift to us, and I think that's true for both of us.
It's been an easy job.
It's been a really easy job, and it's been lovely to do, and it's to welcome you all to Wales. And so again, thanks very much to everybody who's been involved. And so we come to the big reveal, because of course, as Martin has reminded us, there will be an OER15, and as we, as co-chairs, hand over to the new co-chairs, I'm very glad to say that having invited you to this Celtic nation, our sister Celtic nation of Scotland is going to invite us to the next. And so I'd like to invite Lorna Campbell and Melissa Heighton, the new co-chairs, to come and present about next year's conference.
Thanks very much. Will we get our slides up there? There we go. Thank you very much, Hayden, and thank you to Martin for passing over the co-chair to Melissa and I. I've been every single one of the OER conferences. I really feel this is my conference. It's one I come to every year. And I remember sitting in one of the very first ones, listening to John Daniel giving his keynote and elbowing Joe Wilson, who was saying, it would be great if we could do this in Scotland. So now it gives me immense pleasure to announce that we will hold OER16 in Edinburgh. Melissa and I will co-chair it together. And one of the themes of the conference will focus on the value proposition for embedding open culture in the context of institutional strategies. So open culture is going to be the theme for OER16, and you can interpret that how you will, fostering a culture of openness within your institution or opening access to cultural heritage collections for education. And these are some of the themes that we hope to focus on. And you'll see some of them are picking up from themes that have already been explored during this year's conference. But I really hope that we can bring together some of the open communities as well, because I think we are in danger of siloing ourselves, that we have the open knowledge community and the open education community, the open access community, the open data community. And one of the things we want to do is to really bring these together. And we also want to focus as well on looking at how can we open access to all these wonderful collections of resources that we have to make sure that they're available for use in education. To some extent, we're maybe going to turn the focus back onto open educational resources. I'm going to pass over to Melissa now, who's going to welcome us to the University of Edinburgh.
Thank you. University of Edinburgh is delighted to provide the venue to host the conference next year. It's a wonderful university, an ancient history of openness and widening participation. Scottish education system is very proud of a very broad base and wide access in participation. And the University of Edinburgh, of course, has a long history in the extension movement and through our history in the university settlement and being a civic institution founded on the idea of educating as openly as we could to as many people in the city and the nation. And now globally, Edinburgh has taken a number of very bold moves in the digital education space. And I think that part of having you all as our guests will be exciting to talk about the range of ways in which, as we were talking about who our allies around openness are, to try to bring, as Lorna said, the many different groups of people who are interested in open, but also connecting with digital education. And Edinburgh is also, it's a very beautiful city. It's also very famous for being a festival city. And in April next year, we've managed to attract 3 large conferences to the University of Edinburgh, all which we're sort of discussing possibly around trying to create a festival of digital education. So we have Learning at Scale, Learning Analytics, and OER15 all coming to Edinburgh around the same time. Whether those should overlap or dovetail or back-to-back is still in some discussion. If you have opinions about that, please come and contact us and join the conference committee, because we need your help in getting all of those things together. But I think that will bring some cross-fertilization between various different groups of people who are all interested in some of that same kind of ideas about how we open up education. Please do come and join us in Edinburgh. We have a holding page, landing page for the conference, which you'll be able to find. And we do need your help. And the conference has been so well run. The sunshine has been wonderful. I can't promise that for Edinburgh, but we'll certainly try. But the conference has been so well run, and I'm sure that is the efforts of many, many people. And this what is nice about being part of a community of people. Sometimes people say, is it a community? You know, what is the OER community? But I think the nice thing is that everybody shows up together and participates in making it possible for this event to happen. So please stay in touch, sign up, keep up to date. The dates will come out soon, but as I say, if you have opinions as to whether you would want those 3 conferences to bump up together in a line, overlap or whatever, I'd be interested to hear. So thank you very much, and we will see you this time next year. Thank you.
Thank you.